Hello and welcome to another episode of the Interwoven podcast. I'm your host, Adam Roxby. And in today's episode, we're very pleased to be listening to a conversation between Sandrine Singleton-Perrin and Vishal Narbheram. Vish is the founder of Onward Shift, and after spending most of his working life in the construction industry and seeing the detrimental effect of poor mental health, he decided to do something about it. So in this conversation, you can expect discussions about the masculine nature of the construction industry, techniques to improve your mental health, and how Onward Shift is working not only to change the culture of mental health in the construction industry, but providing services to a multitude of businesses to improve their well-being. So without delay, let's go and listen to the conversation between Sandrine and Vish.
Well, hello, Vish. It's really lovely to have you on this podcast and have this conversation with you around mental health, founders, well-being, and all these things. So when we met, I don't know, a few months into launching your business called Onward Shift, if I'm right, I think you started Onward Shift based on your own struggle. So two questions in one, as it were. So tell us about Onward Shift, and at what point did you realize that your personal experience could become a business, but also a mission?
Absolutely. Well, I want to start by saying it's always such a pleasure speaking with you. Like, genuinely, I remember having such a quick but really in-depth chat with you at the networking event when you reached out on LinkedIn and said, oh, do you want to be a part of this survey? And I was like, yes, of course. Thank you so much for, even inviting me on this. And it's just, I'm really excited to talk about, Onward Shift and mental health and stuff. So a little bit about me is my name is Vishal Narbheram. I'm the founder of Onward Shift, but way before that, I was an electrician, and I still am. For 16 years, I've been doing that, working in the construction industry, which has got, I would say, I don't like using the word crisis, so let's say severe mental health challenges and well-being challenges. I was in the midst of that lifestyle every single day, Monday to Sunday. And one thing I realized was when my mental health deteriorated, I couldn't find one platform, like just one safe space for me to get all the support I wanted, because I was listening to podcasts, I was reading blogs, I was doing counselling, and then after that I was doing coaching. I was signing up to loads of newsletters just around mental health, what burnout is, and just trying to understand the terminology my psychiatrist and my coaches and my counsellors were using with me. And I could never find just one place which had it all. And I'll be honest with you, it took me, so if you think I was 24 when I was struggling with my mental health initially, and I launched Onward Shift when I was 30. So that's 6 years later, because it was just in the back of my mind of, I want to do something, but I don't know what, until I was like, the best thing I could do is just get started with anything. And here we are today with Onward Shift. And it's just, I'm sure you'll ask me loads more questions about it. But this is a little bit about me. I struggled with mental health, couldn't find a solution. So I'm trying my best to create that solution.
What does that solution involve? So Onward Shifts, do you want to tell us just a bit about the platform and how it helps with mental health? And I think it's quite holistic.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got podcasts, blogs, newsletters, walk and talk events in Colchester, which are our free resources. So, you don't need to subscribe. We don't pester people to subscribe and things like that. It's just, if you want to use it, use it. I have really interesting conversations with really interesting people. And then on the paid side of things, we've got coaching, counselling and keynote speaking. So that supports not only people, but also businesses. So we can create bespoke packages for businesses to support them with their mental well-being and their team's mental well-being. But if you're an individual struggling with your mental health, then we've got coaches and counsellors to support you. So we've got 10 counsellors, I think it's about 9 coaches, and for businesses we've got about 6 keynote speakers. That's a platform that's going to continuously grow as the journey goes on.
So you said that's interesting, even for your own benefit, it was really difficult to find the right help. One question I want to ask you is, why do people wait until the very last minute or when it's almost too late to reach out for help?
Honestly, that's a really, really great question. There's so many answers going through my head, but the one that really sticks out is because there's this stigma attached to mental health, and it's the most frustrating stigma that exists, because the way I try and explain it is, if we break an arm or break a leg, we race off to the hospital and we're immediately thinking of solutions and wanting it to be repaired and rectified as soon as possible. But with our mental health, we're just no way near the same urgency. And I find that really frustrating, because we don't acknowledge our mental health can consistently deteriorate over weeks and over months. And the longer we leave it, the worse hole we're digging. And I just find that stigma attached to it is just so unhelpful. So that's why it's so important. I know a lot of people will go, this is a bit woo-woo, but I think it's so important to lead with empathy and genuinely just like say, I'm struggling, and seeking help, because there's no shame in that. There's no hardship in that. The hardest bit is, you go out and you find yourself some support, and the first session will be hard. Yeah, no, we can't lie about it. In a first session with a coach or a counselor or a therapist or whoever it is, it's going to be challenging, because you're going to have to sit in a very uncomfortable space and be vulnerable. But you'd rather go through that 1 hour of uncomfortability than sit through that every single day for a long period of time. So although I've got lots of answers for that question, I think the main focus I want to stick to is that negative stigma attached to mental health, and how that needs to be completely abolished. We just need to erase that from people's mindsets. There is no shame in seeking help. There is no shame in wanting help. In fact, personally, I think you're a stronger person to stand up and say, I'm struggling, I need help, and I'm going to go get that help, rather than struggling in silence.
Yeah, so I think you're right. I think there's a deeply ingrained stigma around mental health and vulnerability. And I think people kind of conflate vulnerability with weakness, which it isn't. And you're right, I think it's the hardest, most challenging piece of education that needs to happen. So I want to ask you, because you're a man and you're a strong advocate for men's mental health, and there's a lot around that. I think the stigma is particularly strong with men. Do you want to tell us a bit about that, what your experience is with men's mental health? And I know you've been talking to people in construction, and so what, if you want to share your experience and knowledge in that space, in that regard?
Yeah, absolutely. So I can kick things off by sharing some statistics, and I'm just going to focus on the construction industry right now, but then we can kind of gather a picture of that. So the first statistic is the construction industry is approximately 85% male dominated. So you've got a very masculine industry, and that I don't think has ever changed, but it's hopefully going to change in the future. But that's a whole different conversation. Now, a survey was carried out in 2025 by a Chartered Institute of Building, also known as CIOB. And they carried out this survey with just over 800 construction workers. And the statistics that came back were sadly unsurprising. 94% struggled with stress, 83% struggled with anxiety, 60% struggled with depression. 1 in 4 construction workers actually had suicidal thoughts, and we lose 2 construction workers to suicide every working day in the UK, which is 3.7 times higher than the national average. Now, that's just construction. Now let's look at men in general, not just in the UK, but globally. 75% of suicides are men. And in the UK, this is the thing that I've recently learned, only 36% of NHS referrals for mental health support are men. So you can see 75% are committing suicide, only 30+% are actually seeking that support. And when you look at the research into that, you find that a huge proportion is simply because there's the stigma attached to mental health. Men are feeling too weak. They don't want to be seen as a burden. They don't want to be seen as, somebody seeking mental health because it's an icky word. It's bonkers. And I personally think, and I'm sure you'll agree, enough is enough. We can't continue, acknowledging the statistics, but then also saying, you can't really get help because you're a geezer. No, it's the complete opposite. If you're struggling, the right thing to do for yourself, for your family, and for all the loved ones around you is to look in the mirror one day and go, I desperately desperately want to seek help, and that's completely okay. And that's the stigma. Again, we go back to that word stigma, but that's exactly what we're trying to break down, not just in Onward Shift. Onward Shift is my baby, and I'd love to promote it all day long, but there are other incredible companies doing incredible work. I just think mental health support shouldn't be a negative, it should be a positive. And like you said so beautifully, it's a mindset shift, and we do have to shift that mindset.
And do you think things are evolving, are changing? Do you think, I mean, obviously I'm not a man, so I don't know, but from a man's perspective, there's this kind of ingrained message where you're supposed to be the provider, the protector. So what do you think would help change mentality and mindset? So I know you personally, you go and talk to people, and I know you've recently talked to, I don't know, hundreds of construction workers and students. So how do you think we can help towards putting in place or eradicating stigma around mental health, particularly in those sectors, in construction industry, but generally?
I think it's so important to say this from the get-go. I think things evolve by this exact thing that me and you are doing right now. And I think it's so important to also add that gender plays a huge part. Men can talk to men and women can talk to women, but allyship comes from when we talk to one another. And you've open-heartedly asked me so many questions about men's mental health, and you've absorbed this information, and I just think that's the future. It's not about saying men versus women and women versus, it's nothing to do with that. It's about saying men struggle with this and women struggle with this, so how can we come together and find solutions? And that togetherness, I think, is part of a huge picture that we need to paint for the future. It's so important, in my personal opinion, that that's the first step for us to create safer spaces and healthier environments, because I'm sure my missus won't mind me saying this. I might get in trouble later, but that's fine. But, we struggled with communication at the beginning of our relationship. I had my way of life and she had her way of life. Until we slowly broke that down and communicated with each other, things were tough. And then all of a sudden, over years of consistently talking and understanding and empathizing with one another, we got to a place where we don't actually really argue anymore. It's more we communicate. And I think that's just a huge part of how we move forward, is opening that communication, leading with empathy. I think a lot of men will hear the word, empathy, and instantly see it as a sign of weakness. But honestly, it's really not. It's opening your heart to just understanding and moving forwards. I hope that answers your question in a roundabout way.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. Empathy, compassion. And I know these kind of words have connotations. Like, say, people think, oh, what's that kind of woo-woo? Or, it's a bit like indulgent or self-indulgent. I'm quite interested in talking about self-compassion within the kind of, founder space and self-employed, because everything starts with us. Like you were saying, we need to be well enough. We need to be resilient, emotionally, balanced in order to help others and run our business, successfully and efficiently. And I think that element, that piece of self-compassion, empathy should really be emphasized. When I've spoken to some founders, I thought they might kind of resist it, but they kind of were quite receptive. And this thing about emotional resilience as well. So self-awareness of how we respond to situation, relationships, conflict and all that. And I think there's a huge amount of work that needs to be done. And it's not about judging anyone's experience. No, I don't know about you, but we weren't taught how to understand and deal with emotions, particularly the ones we call negative or difficult. Is it something you do about, kind of emotional resilience that you talk about in the construction sector when you deal with people?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot of resilience. I mean, that's definitely a thing that we can kick things off with. Like, there's a lot of resilience in the construction industry, and there's a positive side and a negative side. And the positive side is, this could be a bit of a biased opinion, but I do believe construction workers are some of the strongest people you'll ever meet. They work in the rain, the snow, you name it, they'll work in those conditions. They work in some of the most challenging circumstances you can think of, especially in building sites and things like that. And then you get the other side of resilience, which is, could be seen as the negative side, where the man up culture is really, really rife. It's don't show emotions, don't be vulnerable. There's no space to be that, to actually have these conversations. And when you do finally pluck up the courage to have the conversation, it's usually kind of like put aside. It's sort of like, man up, get over it, you're a man, you don't need to worry about this, you don't need to worry about that. But that's, again, it comes down to that one word, stigma, and that's the stigma that we want to really detach from. But I'd really love to talk about entrepreneurship as well, because I know your community is huge in entrepreneurship, and it's solely what you guys focus on. And I'd love to talk more about. I could talk about construction all day long, but I want the listeners to also feel as if they're going to walk away with maybe an insight into my thought process of entrepreneurship, and yeah, I'd love to dabble in that as well, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you're talking about this stigma, from our point of view, and certainly mine, the work I do with sophrology to help people with wellbeing and performance, is that idea that, the art or the skill of the pause, to actually pause, and how powerful that can be. And pausing doesn't mean you have to kind of get your yoga mat for an hour and a half and get your gear. It means you actually just bring yourself back, and, you come back to your body, you come back to your breath, and, breath is on tap. You don't have it. It's free. It's there. And you can really kind of change your emotional state by just breathing a bit more consciously. Just take these few minutes, few times a day. And when it's too much, when you get, things get on top of you, it's not about pushing through. And I think what, that you were talking about resilience, the negative and the positive. And one of the negative things about resilience, or what we think resilience is pushing through, going through your limits, and just, keep going. And that's not it. That's not it. Being resilient is also knowing when you need to stop and just pause. And that pause can literally be a few minutes before that difficult conversation, before that next board meeting, or whatever it is. The world and your business are not going to collapse because you're actually building in those habits of, just stepping back a bit. Because stress, as you know, stress is it's a major thing for all of us in the modern living, working. But stress in itself is not bad. It's just that when it's constant and there's no time for recovery, there's no time for pausing, that's when stress becomes unhealthy and harmful. If chronic stress is not addressed, then, we end up in burnout. And if, burnout, what does it mean, burnout for a founder? Self-employed? End of the business, and obviously all the ramifications on personal lives and everything. So it's really important, it's vital that people learn how to look after themselves.
You want to know a little secret I do before my speeches or during my speeches now? So I did something called the 4-7-8 breathing exercise. So basically you breathe in through your nose for 4 seconds, you hold it for 7 seconds, and then you breathe out through your mouth for 8 seconds. And honestly, I've been doing this for years. So I'll tell you a little funny story about it. Funny to me, not to my therapist. So I was sitting opposite her, and I was really fidgety, and I was really anxious, and my body was tight, and I just didn't want to be there, And she said, "Vish, we're going to try a breathing exercise." And I said, "Oh, for God's sake, no, please don't make me. This is so useless, so rubbish. It's just the worst thing you can ask me to do right now. I'm full of anxiety, and you want me to breathe, something I do every day, every second of the day." So you can definitely tell I was a pain in her ass as a client. But she, we all sat down, and she said, "Look, we're just going to try it." And this was 6 years ago. And to this day, I use it pretty much every day. I could be driving in the van, and I'll be like, I'm going to do the 4-7-8 because I just feel so much anxiety sitting here in traffic, or just, constantly on the move, on the go. So sometimes a moment to pause just to reconnect with yourself and change the remainder of your day. And I say this to construction workers a lot. I say, look, mate, just get off your phone, stop using social media or whatever you're on your phone doing, right? Put your phone in your pocket and just do the 4-7-8. It takes 60 seconds of your day just to reconnect with yourself, and it will massively change your mood. And I'm yet to get a negative review from that. I'm yet to get someone say that didn't work. I get people say, "Oh, I really struggled doing the full 4-7-8. And the solution to that isn't to push through, it's to do 2-3-4. Work your way up to 4-7-8. Yeah. And that's what I had to do. Because your lungs need quite a lot of capacity to hold your breath for 7 seconds and to release for 8 seconds. Yeah. It's actually quite challenging. So be kind, work your way up to 4-7-8, and do it as often as you need to.
What I like about this sort of tools or this sort of breathing techniques is that you can do them anywhere. You could, like you say, you can do them driving. Yeah. And that breathing is very powerful. And I think that's what people don't know about it. It's the only body function that we've got control over. There are some really basic things you can do to really kind of change how you operate, how you feel inside. It's a message we need to spread.
There's another one as well. It is feel. You know, sometimes when I'm personally really struggling with my anxiety, so I've got ADHD and OCD, so I really struggle with that. And sometimes just to slow down, I know this is going to sound strange to some people, but let's say I'm sitting on a chair, I'll feel the material of that chair. And I don't mean I'm going to just touch it. I'm going to really feel that material of the chair or the handrest. Or if I'm driving, I will feel what my steering wheel actually feels like. And that within itself just allows me to escape from my emotions and just be present somewhere else. It doesn't have to be, 20 minutes of feeling a steering wheel, no one's saying do that, but it can just be like a few seconds and it just snaps you out of this thought process. And with ADHD, your mind can spiral a lot. So when you can just quickly jump off that and go, oh yeah, okay, my mind's on something else, So here's a question for you, right? What's your favorite chocolate bar? If you eat chocolate.
Yeah, I like dark chocolate. I tell you what, Vic, I like the dark chocolate with some raspberry bits in it.
Lovely. When's the last time you actually tasted it?
Good point. A few weeks ago.
The thing what I find is my favorite chocolate bar is like a Yorkie or a Galaxy, typical sugar rush chocolate. No, not eloquent like your one. But I got asked that question, Vish, so you eat that chocolate, but when's the last time you tasted it? And I said, mate, oh my God, such a stupid question, right? Until I was like, behind the scenes, and I was like, you know what? I'm gonna just do this. I'm gonna put the chocolate, I'm gonna break the piece, I'm gonna hear the snap, and I'm gonna put it in my mouth, and I'm just gonna leave it there for 10 seconds, and I'm actually gonna chew it mindfully. And I was like, oh my God, I can see why I bloody love this chocolate bar. I'm not just scoffing it and quickly moving on to the next, next job or the next blah, blah, blah. I'm actually tasting this piece of chocolate and it tastes so beautiful. And I think in life, entrepreneurs especially, we're constantly on the go. We're constantly on the move. We're constantly thinking of the next 10 things to do. And we're wearing literally every hat you can possibly wear. Just a couple of minutes of your day, stop, go for a walk, hear the crunch of the leaves, bite your food if it's a sandwich or whatever it is, or if it's a hot cup of tea, taste it and actually mindfully taste it, and it will just blow your mind. It really will blow your mind.
And it doesn't take long, but it really brings you back into the present moment. So what does it mean to have ADHD or OCD or whatever when we run a business? So what the challenges, but also the strengths, I'm guessing.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, there's a lot of people, and this is apparently a debatable topic, but I don't think it is. Neurodiversity is nothing sexy. It's nothing cool. It's nothing like a superpower. Like, I think there's this misunderstanding or this hopefulness that having ADHD makes you really cool and you're hyper focused and you can fixate on things and you can just like smash through tasks and obliterate them. And it's all exciting and you're constantly on the go. Yeah, you may get glimpses of that, but I promise you, it is so challenging to have it. And I can give you some examples. So if we focus on ADHD, right, I can hyperfixate onto something which will take me past 2, 3 o'clock in the morning working on. I could get an idea, wake up in the middle of the night and have to execute that idea, because if I don't, there's no point me trying to go back to sleep. I won't. So I'm consistently tired. I'm consistently burnt out. So I will burn out. If you ask me, it's about 3 or 4 times a year. If you ask my missus, it's probably about 12 times a year because I burn out monthly. It's really bad, but it's because my ADHD does not allow me to stop. Hence why I've learned these small daily techniques to help me calm myself down. But then when you add OCD into the mix of that, I obsess. So not only am I hyper fixated on a task, I am now obsessing over this task to the state where, so I can give you an example actually. So I've recently just written a speech, right? It's 8 pages long, 8 pages. And this is a keynote speech that I'm going to be memorizing. If I get a spelling or a bit of grammar wrong on paragraph 7, I will reread the whole thing from the first word. And I will continuously do that until it's perfect in my head. Now, when I then speak that speech, the grammar and the sentences don't matter anywhere because you go with the flow, right? And, again, with emails, let's say I get an email to price up a job and I will spend ages, and I mean ages, on making every word, every number, every single thing perfect. Send it. And then proofread it again and know I made a mistake somewhere because you're overanalyzing every single thing. So ADHD, like, Has it helped me get to where I want to get to in life? Yes, but at the price of my mental health. As I said, I burn out regularly. I'm exhausted because my brain is constantly spiraling. I obsess over things that most people won't obsess over. And I'll give you an example of this. I had a web developer build my website for me. I think he'd done the first 10 pages or 12 pages or something like that. I gave him 400 snags on a website which didn't have much content on it. And honestly, the snags were so small. It would be like, this shouldn't be a capital letter, or this should be a capital letter, or you're missing a comma here, or the color font on this page is 2 shades too dark or too light in comparison to another page. And that is the OCD, which nobody talks about. That's the neurodiversity nobody talks about. And as a founder, when you attach those, ADHD or OCD, or if you're blessed to have both, with a lifestyle that's chaotic and hectic, where, one minute you're pricing a job, the next minute you're writing a blog, the next minute you're doing a podcast, the next minute you're doing a LinkedIn post, the next minute, you've realized you haven't eaten for the last 13 hours, it can be extremely chaotic. So, look, I just want to emphasize that it's nothing cool. And I genuinely have empathy for those who do struggle with neurodiversity, because it's a community that the outside world thinks is cool, and the inside world is like, oh my God, I'm crumbling and I need help. And I'm not ashamed to say it. I genuinely need help with my ADHD and OCD. So I've got a coach who I've used, and she's on speed dial. So I'm not perfect in any way, shape or form. But those are the pros and those are the cons. Yeah. Unfortunately, I don't think there is as many pros as there are cons, but that's just my experience of it.
Vish, I'd like to conclude this podcast with one question. If you take yourself back to the younger Vish before Onward Shift existed, or anything that you've done so far, what do you think the younger Vish needed most to hear? And what kind of conversation would he need it most to have with someone that would have, helped him?
Yeah, honestly, that's such a beautiful question. And I really hope someone listening to this will maybe take this on. Just be kind to yourself. Life isn't always going to go the way you want it to. There'll be ups, there'll be downs. People will come and people will go. But just be kind to yourself. If you need to be sad, be sad. Don't bottle it up, because that only comes out as anger and frustration later. Be calm and just, honestly, I can't emphasize this enough, but be kind to yourself. I was really hard on myself for many years of my life, and I still am to a certain extent, but nowhere near as hard as I was before. I would daily call myself a failure or not good enough, and it'll be over silly things like I didn't respond to a client quick enough, and I'd think, oh my God, I'm the worst person ever. They didn't care if it was a day late. Just be kind to yourself, because when everything goes right, when your business fails or you move on from it, your health is the only one consistent thing you have. So just be kind to yourself. Don't be too hard on yourself. Look after your health. And you know what? One other thing is not love the people around you. Make time for them. Don't make every relationship transactional. They have to provide something before I provide something, or vice versa. Some relationships can just happen, and it's okay. They might take 10 years to flourish, but that's also okay.
Beautiful lesson. Yeah, beautiful life lesson. Self-kindness, self-compassion. Yeah. And I think it's really underestimated. I think we can be really kind to other people when we've got a close friend who's going through a hard time. Always find some encouraging words. But if you kind of think, well, would I say the same thing to myself if I'm in a similar situation? No, we tend to be very harsh and be very critical, that inner critic. So yeah, I think that's a good message. Vish, it's a pleasure and privilege to talk to you again. And I shall follow you on LinkedIn. And if people want to find out more about you, they can find you on LinkedIn.
The only platform I really use is LinkedIn, but I'm not a social media fan, to be transparent. So if you really wanted to get hold of me, journey@onwardshift.com. Ping me an email and I'll always respond. Unless it's a really bad sales email, then I'm not going to respond.
Well, thank you very much for being part of the community, and I wish you all the best for your business and the rest of your life. And we'll be in touch soon. And it's been lovely talking to you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate you.
Well, thank you so much for that conversation. It was really interesting to hear some of the techniques that you can use to help with your mental health, and how both Sandrine and Vish are working in their own ways to challenge that culture of stigma around mental health. Just a quick mention before I let you go, we are building something pretty amazing over at The Weave, from horizon scans to LinkedIn audits, mindfulness and funding opportunities. You could even get yourself on the next episode of the podcast. If you're interested and want to join the 1% Club, you can find out more over at awake.wearetheweave.co.uk. I've been Adam Roxby, the Director of Communications over here at The Weave, and I look forward to seeing you really soon in the community.